I grew up in a fairly nondescript town outside of London called Watford, quite a big town, and so my parents were great. We moved around a bit, but I sang in a church choir. The church choir was a big thing. I started at 5 because I was musical. Then, at I think age 7, the vicar of the church said, "You should try your son as a choristership at King's College, Cambridge." I did that and I got in. So I went away to boarding school, aged 8, and I sang every day. And I learned this kind of English way of teaching, which is do what that guy did. It's kind of osmotic process of learning music. The great thing about that, I think people who've gone through that British boy choir, cathedral choir or college choir experience, is that you learn to very much to become an instinctive musician. We had a director, a very charismatic director, Sir David Wilcox, and he was a tough but very demanding but very wonderful musician. We adored him. Often think about this now, but when I was 11, I think it was, we sang in the War Requiem and the Spring Symphony with Benjamin Britten, and he came to our school. Of course, we rehearsed with him, and he was a massive figure in British music at the time. We were all completely in awe of him because he had a huge energy. Of course, singing in those pieces with him was an experience I'll never forget, even though it was a very long time ago now. But I think that was many of us who did that would say that was a big influence on us. He was a man who thought a lot about text and about the way that music was shaped. And of course, as a technical composer, he was as good as anyone. So we thought this was great. What I did know I wanted to do was go back and sing in King's College Choir again, which I did as a student. So I got a scholarship at 18, and I went back and sang in King's College, Cambridge, as a tenor in the choir for 3 years. I was there when Sir David Wilcox ended his tenure there. He'd been there a long time. And then Sir Philip Ledger came along after that, and I ended up marrying his daughter, actually, years later. How clever was I? He died a few years ago, but a magnificent musician, and someone, of course, he was a director of Benjamin Britten's festival at the time. I then became a professional singer in London. I was a jobbing singer, so I did all sorts of things. And because I was a tenor, I got work. I also worked as an arranger, an orchestrator for the BBC Radio. So I was writing charts for the jazz orchestra. And I was a good orchestrator. So I learned my trade with people who were, at that time it was you handwrote the scores, you took it to the copyist, you heard it the next day. And then, as I mentioned to someone a bit earlier, you go into the studio, you hear the recording, you think, I won't do that again. You kind of I learned very, very quickly. But then I started arranging for the King's Singers. So I remember Simon Carrington, a name that you'll be very familiar with in this country, but he asked me to do a couple of arrangements for a children's album that the King's Singers were making. It was called Kid Stuff. And I did that. And of course, for me, that was a massive deal. I thought, hey, King's Singers, We grew up with them as young people, and they were just what we wanted to be. Not so long afterwards, my Bill Ives, who was a fantastic singer in the group, he was sick, and I subbed for him completely out of the blue. And then I was asked eventually, Bill decided to leave, so I was asked if I would take Bill's place. So I think to this day, I'm the only guy who joined the King's Singers who did an audition. I did a 3-month audition, basically. But if I'd auditioned, I'd have never got in that group. I was completely the wrong type of singer. But I kind of made my way in that group. For me, I was 30 years old, and we sang at the time kind of 70s, 80s. The kind of literature that was being sung in London was very, very sophisticated contemporary music, and we loved it. But it wasn't music that communicated with choral singers at large. And of course, the man who was doing that was John Rutter, who was, for all of us, he was the benchmark. He kind of showed everyone that it was okay to write in tonal music, And of course, things have changed now, but at the time, that was a big thing for a lot of people who liked to be communicative musicians. And, the King's Singers, the one thing I learned from them, one of the many things I learned from them, was their ability to communicate with their audience and to really educate and communicate at the same time. And I had a huge opportunity with King's Singers. I did a lot of arranging. What I particularly loved doing with King's Singers was I did a lot of arrangements with orchestra, because we did a lot of concerts with orchestra at the time. So, it was great to have the King's Singers and the Detroit Symphony doing your new carol arrangement. I thought that was, fantastic. And then my arranging work developed quite significantly with them. And it was the time of the CD. It was kind of 90s. And so we were making a lot of CDs. I did a lot of arranging. We'd had a publishing agreement at that time with Hinshaw Music. And that was all through really the connection with John Rutter. This whole world of music publishing came into my life, and I thought, gosh, this is great. Here I am. I was, at the time, I suppose, nearly 40 years old, and I was starting to have music published. This guy from OUP, Oxford Press, said to me, "What are you writing at the moment?" I said, "Well, I'm writing some pieces for the Toronto Children's Chorus." He said, "Have you got anything to show me?" It was a Friday. "Have you got anything to show me?" So I said, "Well, I could bring you something on Monday." So he said, "Okay, bring me something on Monday." And I hadn't written a note. Over the weekend, I wrote this piece, and I took it on Monday. It was a carol called Midwinter. He said, "We'll publish this." That was how that all started, and we got on very well. There was a big energy around. And a little later, then they offered me a contract. And I live quite near to Oxford, so I've always had a wonderful, close relationship. I love collaborating with people. I'm a social person, and I like collaborating with people. And my connection with Oxford University Press has been a vital one in my life, and one that's given me a huge amount of energy, and I've always loved the people in it. And eventually I left the King's Singers and I became full-time composer, and then I started conducting too, and by mistake, because I conducted the choir at the Royal College of Music in London for 7 years. Actually, I was asked to take someone's place who couldn't do it anymore in a hurry. So I thought, I don't know how to conduct, haven't a clue, but I'll give it a try. I knew I was a good musician. I could fix things. So I worked very, very hard. I had a lot of help from people. Mike Scheibe, wonderful teacher. He and I went to Australia together to do some course on equal footing. And I said to Mike, "Anything you can do to help me, Mike, I'll be grateful." So I went to all his classes, and I had a lot of help with conducting, and that's what I've pursued since.